We'll take just a few moments, give a quick introduction. As I said, as Felix mentioned, I'm Joey Lou Allen, and I'll be taking you through our topic, design within real-world context, for the next few minutes or so. As always, please take advantage of the Q&A window. If you have questions, just place that in the Q&A window, and the team of Bentley colleagues on the line will do our best to answer those. So today we're going to be focusing in on the topic, design with real-world context. And to start with, let's sort of describe what we mean when we say designing with real-world context. We're all familiar with the basic methodology that we employ when it comes to civil design. We collect data in the field. Over the years, that form, that methodology that we've employed, the tools that we've used, the formats for the data and the methods that we've used to collect and transfer that data into a design environment have changed. You can see several images there on the screen, everything from a plane table and an alidade all the way down to a drone and LiDAR scanning in your cell phone. So as we think about the basic process really of what we do, it can be summed up in that we collect data in the field within the real world, then transmit that data or reprocess that data into a digital environment so that we can design on it, so that we can understand those existing conditions, so that we can recreate reality if it were, and then of course look at alternatives and evaluate our design against reality, quote unquote. Okay? Now, as I mentioned, the forms and methodologies of doing that has changed over the years. And so we're going to look at OpenRoads Designer specifically, and some of the methodologies and the data formats that you can use in OpenRoads Designer when it comes to formatting and creating that reality context. So let me change screens here for just a second. Bear with me. So to begin, which I'm going to kind of start at the beginning here, or what I think is the beginning. And as I said, ask questions. What you see on the screen, I'm in OpenRoads Designer. And within OpenRoads Designer, top left, we've got a drop-down menu. And in that drop-down menu, these are what we've called workflows. And you'll notice those workflows represent various, quote, workflows or methods or things that we need to accomplish, tasks and activities that we might perform in a normal project. We're going to focus in this session on the reality modeling workflow, which you see here. So within the reality modeling workflow, you'll notice that there are tools available to us to work with various types of data, from point clouds, reality meshes, scalable terrain models, raster images, and then reference files. And as you know, reference files could be anything from a DGN file to a shapefile, or a SketchUp file for that matter. Okay? And that's what we're going to focus on today, is how to take advantage of those formats and look at how OpenRoads Designer allows us to put those pieces of data and those formats together to recreate and build context for the reality that we're designing in. So the first thing is, we're all familiar with the terrain model. On the screen you can see the terrain model represented within the drawing file. And so we see that there on the screen. Just as you've probably seen before, I can modify that terrain model and take a look at, excuse me, change the display properties of that terrain model. And I'm just going to click through a couple things here. And for example, I can turn on the contours for the terrain model. And again, as always, I always point out there's a two-dimensional view. In my case, I've got it placed on the left, and a three-dimensional view here on the right. And so typically, within our civil workflows, we have collected data in the field, then we have transferred and processed that data, and then generated a terrain model. And that terrain model became the basis from which we modeled a roadway or parking lot or calculated earthwork. That's basically what we've done, and that's what we're looking at here, is a representation of that terrain model. Okay? And so here we have the three-dimensional view of that terrain model. So we can rotate that up and take a look at our area of interest, our project area. Now, So we've seen the terrain model. We've took a brief look at interacting with it in OpenRoads Designer. We know it's made up of triangles and has contours and so forth. We can see the break lines that represent the roadway and the flow line of the depressed median on the interstate north and south. And let's take a look at a couple of other things. We're familiar with terrains. Let's take a look at attaching raster imagery. Again, the whole point here really, and one of the points and focuses within OpenRoads Designer is again to allow you to consume multiple forms of data so that you can build that context of each and every project. So we've got the terrain data and we want to just simply add in some aerial imagery, and we can see that now displayed within the file, and I can turn that off in view 2. So within OpenRoads Designer, again, we've just attached aerial imagery. Again, to add a little context to our project area so we can evaluate land use, maybe, and again, locate things relative to our proposed project. Now, in addition to that, we might, for example, we might want to utilize shapefiles. We might want to know the flood elevations, the flood areas associated with our project as well. So here I've just turned on a couple of shapefiles. Let me turn on the other shapefile. So I've attached a couple of shapefiles representing the flood area, the floodplains for the 100-year storm along this creek, or really it's a river, along this river in our project area as well. So we can see that the 100-year flood is going to extend up into the northern area of our interchange, which we're going to modify. Okay? So in terms of building that context, we know that there are multiple forms of data, and those sources may come from different places. One may come from, again, the geospatial data source. It may come from another drawing file. It may come from collecting data in the field. But we want to be able to consume and utilize and locate that data geospatially, so we can understand the project site and hopefully evaluate things a little more clearly and a little better. So we've got, again, some of the 2D, quote, data displayed. We've got the imagery. We've got the floodplain data in the form of the shape files. And I'll make a quick note here. You'll notice the cross sections along this river are displayed as well. If I click on the properties for that particular element, you'll know that you'll notice there that the actual information, the I in GIS, is carried into that data, into those graphics. So the floodplain elevation at that cross section is 138. Again, just as a note, when it comes to understanding this data, it's a little more than just visual data. So it does give us context that the floodplain elevation on that cross section right there is 138. All right. Now let's continue a little bit farther. And let's move into other forms of three-dimensional data that we may want to consume. We've seen terrains, we've seen imagery, we've used that in the past, and we may have used shape files as well. Or we may have used floodplain data in the form of DGNs or DWGs or PDFs, so forth. All right, now, taking this just a little farther, let's take a look at point cloud data. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to activate the 3D view here. And again, remember, in OpenRoads Designer, all of this functionality to build this reality modeling world and these different forms of data are all found on the workflow called reality modeling. So I'm going to browse down and I'll just open up the point cloud dialog box, and we're just going to add in a couple of point cloud sets of data for this area as well. So I'm going to select both of those pod files and then open those up. And so now we see that point cloud data. It's currently displayed in the 2D view as well as in the 3D view. I'm going to just simply turn that off in my view 1 and 2D so that we can focus in on the 3D display of the point cloud data. Now, one thing you'll probably hear me mention over and over again, because I think it's important, and I think it's fundamental and somewhat inherent in what we are doing in building this reality context. It's not just simply putting data together. It's putting data together and allowing us, the engineers, the designers, to be able to view it, to be able to manipulate the view as I'm doing here, to be able to rotate and pan and scan across that project site so that I can evaluate all of that data and that structure, or all of that data that I'm looking at and consuming to make decisions. So being able to rotate, pan, and zoom in and out effectively, that's an important aspect of OpenRoads Designer, so that we can put this data together, we can utilize it effectively. So we have the point cloud data here, and another usefulness, I guess, when it comes to understanding data. Sometimes with point cloud data, our objective may simply be to create a terrain model from that point cloud data. But we could also do other things, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. We're going to have a session that focuses on all of the other things you can do with a point cloud in OpenRoads Designer besides create a terrain model. And that'll be next month's session, and we'll talk about that a little later. But one of the basic things I could do with that point cloud, in addition to creating a terrain model from it, now that it's there and it's displayed, I can modify the representation of it. I can actually change the way it's displayed based off of elevation parameters. So I could just take a point cloud, I can change the depth or the height, the gradient of the elevation across there, and then I can apply that to particular views. So again, it's a method not just to simply create the terrain model from the points that are in the point cloud, but to also use it as a tool for making decisions and evaluating the data. So with that point cloud being loaded in there, again, I can make modifications to the height. If I don't particularly like those colors, I'm fond of red and blue, so I'll change it to use red and blue. Okay? But the point there really is to just take advantage of this data for a decision-making tool so that you can understand and see and relate to the data as well. Okay? So we've got the point cloud in there. We can see the terrain model that's been displayed. We can see the 3D data that's been displayed as well. And so now, let's think about, at this point, many of us are ready to, let's model something, let's design something. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to reference in a design. And so we'll begin to take a look at the design aspect of this and how it relates to these forms of existing data. Okay? So I'm going to go up and I'll go to the references dialog box. And again, I'm just going to kind of attach the design here. So I have a separate DGN file, and in that DGN file I have the flyover, I have an exit ramp and an on-ramp and a flyover bridge in our project area. So I'm going to just grab that and attach it into the file, and we'll take a look at the results. Alright, so in the 2D view, if I zoom in over here just a little bit, you can see the representation of the proposed off-ramp that we have here, and you can see the area where we would have a flyover here as well. Now, I'm going to make a couple of modifications to our reference file to add a little more clarity. Let's pull this over here so we can see what's going on. So now, in the two-dimensional view, we can see our proposed interchange. So we can see the horizontal geometry. We can see where we have modeled the three-dimensional ramp. Okay, we can see that in the 2D plane, and we can see all of the associated geometry or elements of that geometry as well. Now, in the 3D view, let's move over to the right, take a look. So we'll open up or we'll activate the 3D view, and once again I'm going to modify the reference because I want to see a couple of extra pieces of information in the 3D view. So now, in terms of modeling in reality context, we have basically compiled or assimilated data from the terrain data, which included the triangles, the break line data of the existing roadways and any other break lines or points that happen to be there. We've laid the aerial imagery over the top or underneath it really in the 2D view so we can use that data. We incorporated the floodplain data from shapefiles so that we can see the extents of the 100-year flood as it relates to our interchange as well. And then we added in a point cloud as well. We added in the couple of pod files in the area so we could add a little more context if we wanted to do, again, just vary the elevation ranges so we could see high points and low points, for example. Okay, so we've compiled all that data, and now we have referenced in the proposed model that we're planning on building relative to all that data. So we can take everything a little bit farther, and let's change our view in view 3. Bear with me here. Let me change just a few switches. Excuse me. All right, and so we zoom in here, and we can see, well, I don't like that. Let's change this. All right, much better. So we can see the proposed design, and we can see that within the context of all of this data. Now, I've added a lot of data, and I recognize that. Mainly just to kind of highlight the different forms that are available within OpenRoads Designer that we can use and take advantage of when it comes to building these elements. Let's change the properties. Bear with me here one more time. There we go. So now we can see the model just a little bit more clearly. Brighten that up. And so again, we can see that proposed interchange. We can see the flyover, the bridge that we're proposing to construct within this area. Right? So we've added again that design element into the existing conditions or the data that we have related for the existing conditions within this interchange area. Now, to take this a little bit farther, we're going to add in a reality mesh. And I want to do it, I just want you to see everything in context. So we'll zoom in again to the 3D representation of our overpass, of that flyover. And then we're going to go back into the references dialog box, and I pulled it off to the side to kind of clear up the screen a little bit. I'll browse out, and I'm going to attach the reality model. And this is a reality model that has a .3mx, which is the output from context capture attached to it. So I have an external DGN that contains the 3mx file, and now I've referenced that DGN into my project. And so now, as we've built up the information within our existing condition or within the area of our project, now we've built up everything from the terrain model to the imagery to the point cloud to the shape files with the flood information, and then finally we've incorporated the reality mesh. And so incorporating that reality mesh and taking a look at this now, again, in context of what our proposed flyover would look like, we get a much more robust picture of what we are proposing to construct. Okay? So the reality mesh again brings ultimately great context into our project. And so we can see again specifically how our proposed design changes or our proposed design is going to interact with that mesh. Now that reality mesh again is output from context capture. It could have originated from multiple methods, but it was basically created from imagery. That imagery could have been collected from an airplane, from a drone. It could have been aerial imagery that was collected. It could be context capture will create the same reality mesh from imagery from your cell phone as well. So you have the opportunity to utilize your cell phone or other methods to capture imagery and then create that reality mesh and utilize it within your project. Okay, and there's an example here I wanted to just take a moment and point out, let me move here for one second. Now, again, thinking in terms of reality modeling and designing in context of reality. With context capture, again, our basic thought process in the past has been to capture existing conditions. The methods may have changed, the formats may have changed, but it was capture existing conditions and then generate a terrain model from it. Well, context capture broadens the opportunity for capturing reality data and using it in different ways beyond, again, just creating a terrain model. So what you see here is a proposed bridge model, and you see context capture output. You see a reality mesh captured while construction of that proposed bridge is ongoing. So you're actually able to take a look at that proposed footing and that proposed pier in context of where it's being constructed. You see the equipment, and you'll notice as I've moved the view around, we're able to capture all of that detailed construction environment information and relate it to the design as well. So in terms, again, of capturing ongoing reality and relating it to our design, context capture is very beneficial. And OpenRoads allows us to take that context capture output and utilize it in the environment we're in so that we can have that, again, that reality mesh available to us so that we can take advantage of it in building context to the reality that we're designing and building in. Okay? So here was just a good example. I thought I wanted to take a moment and just let you guys see this. Again, there is opportunity for context capture to be used in lots of ways and lots of different areas. All right? So let's change back here for 1 second. So we'll go back into our interchange file. And again, we can see that data. We can see how it has been incorporated into the file and into the interchange. Now, one thing that's important, again, ultimately is to be able to consume that data and utilize it to understand and make decisions. Design decisions as we're modeling, as we're designing, as we're making changes and looking at alternatives. Now, one of the things you could do here, and this is just a quick example, we've got just a few minutes to go. One thing you could do, you could just open up, we could actually clip this view, and let's say we wanted to, again, we're trying to understand this data. That's the point here, is that I want to understand a section of this data. So I'm just going to create a quick clip plane, and I don't know, let's just drag it across here in data point. And now, by clipping that plane and clipping that data, again, it's really just another methodology or another tool that we can use to help us understand and evaluate all of these forms of data. And so we have that ability to create that dynamic clipped plane. And you'll notice I can drag this backwards and forwards if I want. So let's say we want to move that section forward a little bit in data point. And then, of course, we're in a 3D view, so we can rotate that view up. And again, we can see those forms of data. And we can take advantage of, again, being able to understand that those pieces and those parts. Let's pull this back a little more. I want to get into the bridge for just a second. Let me rotate the view so I can see a little more clearly. All right, we can zoom in. And so again, that clipped plane is really clipping all of the data. So with the design data as well as all the existing data is being clipped out so that I can see it and I can, again, understand it and take advantage of it for my engineering needs. Okay? All right. Let's change back to the PowerPoint. We've got just a few minutes or so, I believe. A couple of things. First of all, thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to place those in the chat window. The team, I think, have probably been answering questions as I've been walking through the presentation. But again, we'll take a few minutes here at the end. If you happen to have any questions that haven't been addressed, please place them in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to address those.